You think your comfort zone is protecting you, but it's actually destroying you. Jean-Paul Sartre, the father of existentialist philosophy, understood something about human nature that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Your comfort zone isn't a safe harbor where you can rest and recharge. It's a prison you've built for yourself, and you're both the prisoner and the guard. Right now, you're probably thinking, but I need my comfort zone. It's where I feel secure, where I can be myself, where I don't have to worry about failure or rejection. And that's exactly the problem. What you call security, Sartre would call bad faith, a fundamental lie you tell yourself to avoid the terrifying responsibility of being truly free. He spent his life studying what he called radical freedom, the overwhelming reality that you are completely responsible for creating yourself, your values, your meaning, your entire existence. And he discovered that most people can't handle this level of responsibility. So they create elaborate systems of routine, habit, and limitation to avoid confronting the infinite possibilities of their freedom. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how your comfort zone functions as a prison, why staying there is actually the most dangerous thing you can do, and what Sartre would tell you about breaking free. By the end of this, you'll understand why your attachment to comfort is actually an attachment to a form of psychological death, and why the anxiety you feel when you leave your comfort zone isn't a warning sign, it's a sign of life. But here's what makes this different from every other motivational message about leaving your comfort zone. We're not talking about pushing yourself to achieve external goals or overcome fears to get what you want. We're talking about something much more fundamental. We're talking about the existential choice between authentic existence and what he called being for others, living according to scripts written by society instead of authoring your own life. According to Sartre, human beings are condemned to be free. You didn't choose to exist, but now that you do exist, you must choose everything about who you become. And this responsibility is so overwhelming that most people spend their entire lives running from it, creating comfortable limitations where they can pretend they don't have choices, where they can convince themselves that their boundaries are real rather than self-imposed. Your comfort zone is the ultimate expression of what he called self-deception, the fundamental lie you tell yourself about your own nature. This deception convinces you that you are a fixed thing with predetermined limitations, rather than what you actually are, which is pure possibility, existential freedom, the constant creation of yourself through your choices. The first insight that will shatter your illusions is understanding how self-deception operates in your daily life. Sartre realized that every time you say, "I can't," "I'm not the type of person who," or "that's just not me," you're engaging in denial of your true nature. You're pretending that you're a fixed object with inherent limitations, rather than acknowledging that you're a conscious being who is constantly choosing who to become. Think about the stories you tell yourself about your limitations. I'm not good with people. I'm not creative. I'm not brave enough for that. I don't have what it takes. These aren't descriptions of your nature. They're choices you're making about who to be, disguised as facts about who you are. But here's what's really happening when you identify with these limitations. You're using them as an escape from the anxiety of freedom. Because if you're just not that type of person, then you don't have to take responsibility for becoming that type of person. If you can't do something, then you don't have to face the possibility that you're choosing not to do it. He understood that this kind of self-limitation feels safer than freedom, because authentic choice is terrifying. When you're truly free, you can't blame your circumstances, your past, your personality, or your genetics for who you become. You are entirely responsible for creating yourself, moment by moment, choice by choice. And most people would rather live in comfortable confinement than face that level of responsibility. Your comfort zone gives you what he called the spirit of seriousness, the illusion that your current way of being is necessary, important, unchangeable. You convince yourself that your routine, your habits, your familiar patterns of thinking and behaving are essential to who you are. But they're not. They're just choices you've been making so consistently that you've forgotten they're choices. The second way your limitations imprison you is through what Sartre called the look of the other. You've constructed your boundaries not just around what feels safe to you, but around what feels acceptable to others. You've internalized the judgments, expectations, and approval of other people to such a degree that you can't tell the difference between what you actually want and what you think others want from you. This is perhaps the most subtle and dangerous aspect of psychological imprisonment. You think you're protecting yourself from external judgment, but you've actually internalized that judgment so completely that you're now your own jailer. You police your own thoughts, limit your own possibilities, and suppress your own desires before anyone else even has a chance to disapprove. He saw that most people live their entire lives as what he called being for others, constantly performing a version of themselves that they think will be acceptable, lovable, successful in the eyes of other people. But this performance requires you to abandon your authentic self, to kill off the parts of you that don't fit the script others have written for your life. Your safe space becomes the stage where you perform this limited version of yourself day after day, year after year, until you forget that it's a performance. You start believing that this constrained, socially acceptable version of yourself is who you really are. You lose touch with your authentic desires, your genuine values, your real dreams. But according to him, authentic existence requires what he called being for itself, the courage to create yourself according to your own values, rather than living according to the expectations and judgments of others. This doesn't mean being selfish or inconsiderate. It means taking full responsibility for authoring your own life instead of letting others write your story. The third insight about radical responsibility will completely transform how you see your current situation. Sartre believed that you are entirely responsible for your emotional experience, your circumstances, and your responses to whatever life presents you with. Not just partly responsible, not mostly responsible, but entirely responsible. This sounds harsh, even cruel, until you understand what he meant. He wasn't saying that you're responsible for everything that happens to you. He was saying that you're responsible for what you make of everything that happens to you. You're responsible for the meaning you create from your experiences, the values you develop in response to your circumstances, the person you choose to become regardless of your starting point. Your familiar boundaries are built on the denial of this responsibility. They're constructed around the belief that your circumstances control your possibilities, that your past determines your future, that your current limitations are permanent features of reality rather than temporary choices you're making about how to respond to your situation. But when you truly understand that you are completely free, that you can choose your response to any situation, that you can create new meaning from any experience, that you can become anyone you decide to become, your safe space stops feeling like protection and starts feeling like suffocation. He understood that this level of responsibility is overwhelming, which is why most people prefer the illusion of being controlled by external forces. It's easier to believe that you're limited by your circumstances than to acknowledge that you're limited by your choices. It's more comfortable to think that you're stuck than to realize that you're staying. Every day, you remain within familiar boundaries. You're making a choice. You're choosing familiar limitation over unknown possibility. You're choosing the anxiety of being trapped over the anxiety of being free. You're choosing to remain a fixed thing rather than embracing your nature as constant becoming. Write in the comments, I am responsible for who I become. If you're ready to stop hiding behind limitations and start owning your existential freedom. Subscribe if you're ready to stop living on autopilot and start making authentic choices that honor your capacity for self-creation. Here's the fourth insight that will shake you to your core, and this is where Sartre's philosophy becomes intensely practical. He discovered that anxiety isn't a feeling to be avoided or overcome. Anxiety is the emotional signal that tells you you're confronting your freedom. When you feel anxious about leaving familiar territory, you're not experiencing a problem. You're experiencing the fundamental condition of human existence. Most people interpret anxiety as a sign that they should retreat back to safety, back to the familiar, back to their established patterns. But Sartre would tell you that anxiety is actually the sign that you're approaching authenticity. It's the emotional experience of confronting the vast range of possibilities available to you, the overwhelming reality of your freedom to choose who to become. He called this the anguish of freedom, the dizzying recognition that you could choose to be anyone, do anything, create any kind of life for yourself. This isn't the anxiety of fear, where you're worried about a specific threat. This is existential anxiety, the profound recognition that nothing is predetermined, nothing is guaranteed, and everything depends on your choices. When you're standing at the edge of familiar territory, feeling that flutter of anxiety in your stomach, that's not your intuition telling you to be careful. That's your consciousness recognizing its own power. You're experiencing what he called vertigo, not the fear of falling, but the fear that you might jump, that you might choose something completely different from what you've chosen before. Most people misinterpret this anxiety and use it as evidence that they should stay where they are. I feel anxious about this, so it must not be right for me. But he understood that anxiety is actually pointing toward authenticity. The things that make you most anxious are often the things that would most liberate you from self-imposed limitations. This is why personal growth feels uncomfortable. This is why change is difficult. This is why stepping into your potential creates so much internal resistance. You're not just learning new skills or adopting new habits. You're confronting the fundamental reality of your freedom, and freedom is terrifying because it makes you entirely responsible for the consequences of your choices. The fifth insight about authentic choice will revolutionize how you make decisions. According to Sartre, most of the choices you think you're making aren't really choices at all. They're automatic responses based on habit, social conditioning, or the desire to avoid anxiety. Real choice requires what he called existential freedom, the willingness to choose without guarantees, without knowing the outcome, without the security of predetermined paths. When you're trapped in familiar patterns, you're not really choosing your life. You're defaulting to your life. You're following scripts written by your past experiences, your social environment, your internalized expectations. You're choosing the familiar not because it serves you, but because it's familiar. But authentic choice requires what he called choosing without criteria, the willingness to make decisions based on your authentic values rather than on external validation, social approval, or the promise of comfort. This kind of choice is terrifying because it requires you to take full responsibility for creating your own values rather than borrowing them from society. Think about the major decisions in your life. How many of them were really your choices? And how many were you simply following the path of least resistance? How many times did you choose what felt safe rather than what felt true? How many opportunities did you avoid because they didn't fit the image you have of yourself or the image you think others have of you? He believed that most people live what he called inauthentic existence, making choices based on what they think they should want rather than what they actually want, what they think is expected of them rather than what calls to them, what feels safe rather than what feels alive. But authentic choice requires courage, not just the courage to face external challenges, but the courage to face your own freedom. It requires the willingness to choose without knowing if you're making the right choice. Because in Sartre's philosophy, there are no right choices. There are only choices you make and choices you take responsibility for. Your established boundaries eliminate the need for authentic choice by narrowing your options to only those that feel safe, familiar, socially acceptable. They create the illusion that you're making choices while actually keeping you trapped in automatic patterns that require no real decision-making at all. When you break free from self-imposed limitations, you're not just expanding your possibilities, you're reclaiming your capacity for authentic choice. You're acknowledging that you are the author of your own life rather than a character in someone else's story. This is what he called radical self-creation, the ongoing project of choosing who to become moment by moment, decision by decision, without relying on predetermined templates or social scripts. It's terrifying because it makes you entirely responsible for who you become. But it's also liberating because it means you're not trapped by who you've been. The most profound transformation happens when you understand what Sartre meant by existence precedes essence. Most people believe they have a fixed nature, an essential self that determines their possibilities and limitations. But he argued that for human beings, existence comes first. You exist first, and then you create your essence through your choices. This means you're not limited by your personality, your past, your genetics, your social background, or any other factor that seems to define you. These things influence you, but they don't determine you. You determine you through the accumulation of choices you make about how to respond to your circumstances. Your established patterns are built on the opposite belief, that your essence precedes your existence. They're constructed around the idea that you are a certain type of person with certain limitations, and therefore you can only exist within certain boundaries. But this is backwards. You can choose to become any type of person by choosing to act like that type of person. Want to be confident? Start making choices that a confident person would make. Want to be creative? Start engaging in creative activities regardless of whether you consider yourself creative. Want to be brave? Start taking actions that require courage, even if you don't feel brave yet. He understood that you become who you are through your actions, not the other way around. You don't act confident because you are confident. You become confident by acting confident. You don't wait until you feel ready to step into possibility. You step into possibility and discover what you're capable of in the process. This is perhaps the most revolutionary insight in all of philosophy, that you can literally choose to become anyone you want to be by consistently choosing to act like that person. Your current self is not your permanent self. It's just the accumulation of choices you've made up until now, and you can start making different choices at any moment. So the next time you feel that familiar pull toward comfort, toward the safe and familiar, toward the limited version of yourself you've been performing, remember this: you are not your established patterns. You are not your limitations. You are not your past choices or your current circumstances. You are existential freedom. You are infinite possibility. You are the constant creation of yourself through your choices. And every moment you spend in familiar territory is a moment you're choosing to deny your own nature, to limit your own possibilities, to imprison your own freedom. According to him, man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. Your established boundaries are an attempt to escape this responsibility, to pretend that your choices are limited, that your possibilities are narrow, that your freedom is constrained. But your freedom cannot be constrained except by your own choices. Your possibilities cannot be limited except by your own decisions. Your potential cannot be trapped except by your own refusal to step into it. The anxiety you feel when you consider leaving familiar territory isn't a warning, it's an invitation. It's your consciousness recognizing its own power, your freedom calling you toward authenticity, your authentic self demanding to be expressed. Type in the comments, "I choose freedom over comfort," if you're ready to break out of the limitations you've built for yourself and start living as the radically free being you actually are. This is not about becoming reckless or irresponsible. This is about becoming truly responsible, taking full ownership of your capacity to create yourself, your circumstances, and your experience of existence. This is about recognizing that your familiar boundaries aren't protecting you from danger. They're protecting you from life itself. Because ultimately, Sartre understood that authentic human existence requires the courage to live without guarantees, to choose without certainty, to create meaning rather than discovering it, to become rather than simply being. Your established patterns offer you the illusion of security at the cost of your humanity. And that's not a trade worth making. Your life is not a problem to be solved, but a freedom to be exercised. Your existence is not a limitation to be accepted, but a possibility to be explored. Your boundaries are not a sanctuary to be preserved, but limitations to be transcended. And the key to that transcendence is in your hands. It always has been. You just have to choose to use it.